Well, let me welcome everyone here. We've got a great group for you on a really important topic. I am glad to be joined by my colleague, Martin Heinrich, who is the Senate Democratic thought leader and policy leader on energy issues. And he and I are doing something that's a little bit unusual, which is challenging a presidential emergency declaration. Doesn't happen a lot, but this is the time it should happen. I'll talk a little bit about the effort and why we're doing it. Senator Heinrich will then speak, and then following Martin, we will have comments from three preeminent environmental leaders in our country. First, Jackie Wong, who's the Senior VP for Climate at the NRDC. Next, Ben Jealous, who's the Executive Director of the Sierra Club. Third, Tiernan Sitterfield, who's the Executive Vice President of Government Affairs at the League of Conservation Voters. After that, we'll open it up for questions. On President Trump's first day in office, he signed a number of orders, and one of the orders he signed was an energy emergency declaration using a particular statute that allows such a declaration that can be challenged by Congress. One of the bits of language that the president used in the order was this: the policies of the previous administration have pushed the nation into an energy emergency. The declaration of emergency is a complete sham. It's a complete sham, and that's the reason that we're challenging the declaration of emergency. If there's an emergency, it's Donald Trump, but it's not American energy. If you look at this chart that shows the growth in American energy production from 1950 to 2023, and we would have one more year to add on to that. But what the chart shows is America is producing more energy than we ever have. Last year, America produced more gas than we ever have, produced more oil than we ever have. And the thing that's really exciting is the rapid acceleration of renewable power, which is shown in this green part of the chart. It was the best year for energy production, all in the history of the United States. In addition, the United States is now, there's probably a technical term for this. I call it, we're an energy surplus nation. We produce more than we consume. Those lines kind of crossed in 2019. We started to produce more than we consume. But last year, we set a record in that surplus. And that surplus has been valuable in terms of our own economy, but also in other goals, like helping nations around the world wean themselves away from having to rely on petro-dictators for energy. So there's no energy emergency. The previous administration's policies, the president's talking about the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill and other things that have helped lead to this dominance of American energy. If there is an emergency, however, it's what Donald Trump is doing right now. Donald Trump is unplugging energy projects all across this country. I'll let Senator Heinrich talk about it from the global perspective and from New Mexico. But in Virginia, we have a number of projects that have been announced with great fanfare, including by a Republican governor, that have relied on tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act. Those projects are now up in the air and potentially in jeopardy. We have a huge grant that was awarded to our port, the Port of Virginia, to completely electrify all their cranes. That grant is in jeopardy. We've got an offshore wind facility that's probably farther along than virtually any. There were 2 working turbines in a test pattern, but now we're building around 70 turbines. It's about half completed, and not just the turbines and the pylons, but subsea cables, et cetera. That project is now under jeopardy. The Office of the Department of Energy that administers grants under the IRA was shuttered as part of the DOGE effort. Donald Trump is waging a concerted war against energy projects, and he's killing jobs. And when you kill energy projects, constricting supply at a time demand is going up, you're also increasing costs. And you increase costs further when you put tariffs on the importation of energy from Canada, for example. So America is dominating in energy. Why would Donald Trump declare there to be an energy emergency? And after declaring there to be an energy emergency, why would he unplug project after project after project all across this country? The answer is just pretty darn simple. This is a headline from The Guardian, although there's similar headlines from other publications that came out in July. Trump promised to scrap climate laws if U.S. oil bosses donated $1 billion to his campaign. He had a meeting at Mar-a-Lago. He brought in folks from the fossil fuel industry. He eyeballed them and said, you support me in a major way, and I'm going to unplug environmental laws to your benefit. And this was a quote. One of the attendees of the meeting said, Donald Trump says you'll get it on day one. And they did. They got it on day one. And what did they get on day one? They got an agreement. They got in the emergency declaration, Donald Trump directed his administration to cut back on the Clean Air Act's application to projects, cut back on the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, National Historic Preservation Act, National Environmental Policy Act. We're going to cut back on all of these protections that Congress has put in place. But to go even further, the first thing in the executive order, the first thing that President Trump directed agencies to do was make aggressive use of eminent domain. Take private landowners' property to benefit big oil. And I want to focus on that. If you read the executive order, it sounds a little bit benign because it talks about the need to promote energy production. Energy production. Well, we want to produce energy. We want to be a strong energy economy. It's only when you get to the bottom, there's a definition of energy production that intentionally excludes wind and solar. The definition of energy production that we're going to scrap all these laws to promote: oil, gas, coal, nuclear, hydrothermal, biodiesel, but not wind and solar. So we can scrap or reduce or minimize all these to benefit my friends, but if it's wind and solar, no, they don't get the benefit of these reductions. And that's why Donald Trump is killing jobs with the unplugging of these projects and raising costs. The procedure that we're using is a procedure that allows even one member of Congress to challenge a presidential emergency declaration under normal circumstances. It's not used very often. But this emergency declaration is such a sham, devised for such a corrupt purpose, that Senator Heinrich and I decided we're using it. It's hard for the minority to gain the floor and gain control of an issue. Usually the agenda on the floor is set by the majority, and that's a reality. Wish it wasn't the case, but it is. But there are about 4 things that not only a minority, but even a single senator can do to force a vote on the floor of the Senate, and we're going to force a vote, force everybody to declare where they are on this sham emergency declaration and this unnecessary degradation of important environmental protections. The schedule right now is that we would run through reconciliation this week, and we locked in a schedule whereby the debate on this is going to be a 6-hour debate followed by a vote sometime before next Friday, likely to happen early to mid next week. That was locked in yesterday. And now, again, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Senator Heinrich. We came into the Senate on the same day. We are both University of Missouri graduates who strangely ended up in other places. We've been close friends, and he's the Democratic leader on energy issues. And Martin, I'll just let you then introduce the speakers to follow.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah. Appreciate it. I'm going to put one of his charts back up here because it really sort of reinforces the reality of where we are today because of the incredible work of the last decade, really. When you look at the energy that America is producing today, it is off the charts, and it is record in both conventional and renewables. We're producing roughly 13 million barrels a day of crude oil. That is more than any country has ever produced, ever in the history of the planet. But what Tim talked about that's really exciting is that if you look at our electric grid in 2024, we added 48 gigawatts. That's like 48 nuclear generating stations worth of carbon-free energy in 2024. And that's what Trump is putting at risk. 48 gigawatts of solar, wind, and storage. If you look at everything that was added to the grid in 2024, 95% of those projects were clean. Why would that be the case? Because they're cheaper, faster, and less capital intensive. The market has made this decision in our electric grid that these are the winning technologies. It's not a policy issue. If you look at them on a levelized cost basis, they are cheaper, they're faster, and they're less capital intensive. If you look at my state alone, we had one project last year that is close to finishing construction that represents a $20 billion investment in the Southwest that represents 3.5 gigawatts, so bigger than the Hoover Dam, one project, 550 miles of high voltage transmission, IBEW workers, the manufacturing for the generation project actually happens in New Mexico. Why is that? Because we created certainty around permitting, tax structure, and that gave people the confidence to build a big thing in America again. Like, we need to be able to build big things if we're going to solve the climate crisis. But for years, it was almost impossible. We are doing that now. And we've brought manufacturing back to the United States as part of this energy renaissance. What this fake emergency does is it injects uncertainty back into those markets. So capital, tax structure, permitting, all up in the air. You have the Army Corps of Engineers paralyzed, not knowing how to implement these executive orders and the emergency declaration. So permits are not getting processed. There are people in the public land agencies that permit many of these projects that have to cross lots of boundaries and cross public lands. Well, lots of those people are getting sacked as we speak. And so what we're doing is we're taking a moment when we should be proud of what we've been able to accomplish and our leadership in the world right now. And the president is injecting enormous amounts of uncertainty. If you're thinking about opening a new factory and you don't know what the tax structure is going to look like in 2025 because of their budget bill and because of their emergency and the actions at our agencies, you don't know if you can get a permit. All of this is going to have a direct impact on skilled trades jobs, and most importantly for the public to understand, it's going to drive up your electric costs. Full stop. Your electric rates are going up. Why are they going up? Because we're at a moment when we're seeing the biggest increase in electricity demand since everybody could finally buy an air conditioner. Like, it's been decades since we've seen surging demand in this country. But because of AI, because of data centers, because of the electrification of large parts of our economy, we have enormous demand. And the cheapest, fastest solutions are the clean solutions. If you take those off the table, everything else gets very expensive very fast. So whether you believe Rhodium or any of the other folks who have looked at this, people's electric bills are going to go up by as much as $489 by 2035. And that's what I think the public needs to understand, is that this emergency declaration by the president, and more importantly, his desire to kill all renewables projects, is going to mean you will pay more for your electric bill going into the future. It's my honor to introduce Jackie Wong, from who's the Senior Vice President for Climate and Energy at NRDC, to talk a little bit more about some of the other impacts as a result of this.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. As has been established, there was no energy emergency when President Trump declared one last month, but his team certainly seems determined to plunge us into one. By going after successful policies that support wind and solar power, his team is kneecapping some of the cheapest and fastest growing forms of American-made energy. And as Senator Heinrich just said, our utility bills are going to go up for that reason, and because they are targeting energy efficiency programs as well. On top of that, they hope to limit consumer choice and tether our future to the dirty fossil fuels of the past. And in sum, Trump is really seeking to choke the clean energy progress that has been creating jobs, lowering costs, and making our country more energy secure. Nobody voted for us to cede this progress, and nobody voted to enrich oil and gas companies on the backs of working families. But there are some people that did ask for this, and those are the authors of Project 2025 and the oil and gas billionaires that Trump solicited in order to bankroll his campaign. Trump falsely declared an energy emergency in order, as a pretense, to basically be able to assert authorities that he does not have and to justify a whole bunch of actions that will lock our country for decades to come into dependence on fossil fuels that are fueling the climate crisis. And so let me just put extra emphasis on this. There is no energy emergency, but there is a climate emergency. And Trump's policies and actions will make it worse, and every person in every corner of the country will pay the price. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Ben Jealous.
Well, good morning, good afternoon. Donald Trump and Elon Musk are rigging this economy to benefit their billionaire buddies. They want to push through big tax cuts for the rich, and they're willing to sacrifice working people's jobs to do it. Last time I was crisscrossing the country on behalf of a green group, I was 20 years old. We were fighting against NAFTA. I was the representative for the Student Environmental Action Coalition. I was paired up with the head of the IBEW. We crisscrossed this country saying, we pass NAFTA, we will gut American manufacturing, say goodbye to the textile industry, and we'll send those factories to countries where they will pollute the earth faster. We were called Chicken Little. And in the 30 years since I turned 21 in 1994 and NAFTA was implemented, America has shut down 65,000 factories. Came back to Sierra Club because at this moment in history, as somebody who's dedicated their lives to civil rights and the environment, there is nothing more important than bringing back manufacturing in the United States to accelerate this conversion of how the entire globe is powered and everything is transported. That, somebody who spent 10 years as a tech investor, I can tell you, is the biggest economic opportunity on planet Earth right now. And the country that leads in that will lead the world economy in this century like we did in the last century. And there's only two real competitors. There's us and the Chinese government. In the last 4 years, for those of you who are, say, 52 or under in this room, you've seen something happen for the first time in your adult life, which is America opened big new factories from coast to coast to give birth to big new industries. And on day one, I gotta say, what made me so scared about NAFTA and the damage, the carnage, it's just my family's rooted in places like Baltimore and Maine, as different as they are, they're both dependent on manufacturing. But when I was a kid, when I was 13 years old, there was a recession where I lived, and my good buddy across the street, his dad lost his job in the factory. 2 days later, his father was dead from suicide. Trump threatened the job of 77,000 workers in the wind industry on day one. Sent shockwaves through their families, through their communities, and threatens to derail the United States from seizing the greatest economic opportunity on planet Earth right now, and cedes all that territory to the Chinese government. And at the same time that we're talking about threatening the jobs, threatening the economic power of this country and its future, he also is threatening to send every citizen's power prices sky high. It's not just that wind and solar and batteries are among the cheapest forms of energy, they are the cheapest forms of energy. And they're getting cheaper faster than any other form of energy. And they're the fastest to put up. We are hanging in the balance right now of history as far as the ability of America to start really turning around the economic fortunes of working families by rebuilding its manufacturing sector. The ability of this country to truly get inflation and cost of living under control by driving down power prices, which when they go up, drive the price of everything else up. And quite frankly, of realizing our moral obligation to accelerate ourselves away from this dependence on fossil fuels. I'm very grateful for the courage of these two senators for standing up and pointing out the obvious. Donald Trump lied to the American people. Donald Trump lied to the American people to benefit billionaires. Donald Trump's objective here is to cut taxes and to allow fossil fuel industries to continue to destroy beautiful places across this country in the interests of greed when we got a better alternative. It's time for our country's people to really, frankly, rise up and demand that the president of these United States put their interests first when it comes to prices, their interests first when it comes to jobs, and our interests first when it comes to leading the world economy in this century. Thank you. With that, I'll turn over to my esteemed colleague, Tiernan Sittenfeld from LCV.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. I'm Tiernan Sittenfeld with the League of Conservation Voters. Thanks to everyone who's here in the nation's capital and to those of you who are following online as well. And huge thanks to Senators Heinrich and Kaine and to your co-sponsors, Senators Hirono, Markey, Merkley, Reed, Sanders, Schatz, and Van Hollen. I think I got them all. You can add if not, for your tremendous leadership in leading this common sense resolution to push back on this sham Trump energy emergency. Trump and Musk's illegal attacks on affordable clean energy in this country are killing American jobs. They are hurting our economic competitiveness. They are rising prices for Americans, families, and communities that can least afford it. And of course, they are worsening the climate crisis. To be clear, this is not about lowering energy prices for Trump and Musk. On the contrary, this is about driving up prices and fossil fuel CEO profits at our expense, at the cost of the choices that we can make in clean energy. We are not in an energy emergency, other than, as we're seeing, the one that Trump is doing his damnedest to create. In fact, Trump inherited a thriving clean energy economy with more than 400,000 new jobs and more cheaper and cleaner energy than ever before. Yet Trump and Musk are desperate to repeal, to impound, to freeze the very clean energy investments that are lowering energy prices for America's families and that are creating so many jobs, the majority of which are in districts across this country that are currently represented by Republicans. And they are doing this all so that they can pay for the tax cuts for their billionaire buddies. Trump and Musk are firing the civil servants who work hard every day to keep our electricity grid safe and secure, and they are gutting the clean energy industries that employ thousands of other workers all across this country. And yes, Trump and Musk are threatening the air we breathe, the water we drink, the lands that we cherish most with permanent destruction, all so that Trump can make good on his promise to big oil CEOs to drill, drill, drill. I could go on and on and on about the harm and the suffering that Trump and Musk are already causing, but there isn't enough time in the day. And I also know, I'm sure the reporters here are eager to get to Q&A. So I will wrap up by saying that it is past time for congressional Republicans to stand up to Trump and Musk's cruelty, chaos, and catastrophic impacts. Supporting this common sense resolution is an excellent place for them to start. Later this week, the Sierra Club, LCV, NRDC, and more than 100 other organizations will be sending a letter to the full Senate urging them to vote yes on this resolution, and LCV will strongly consider including this vote in our 2025 National Environmental Scorecard. So thank you again to Senators Heinrich and Kaine, and I'll turn it back to Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Tiernan. What great speakers. Ben, you said something that kind of made me laugh, although it wasn't really funny. You thanked Martin and I for the courage to state the obvious. It shouldn't be courageous to state the obvious. It should be obvious to state the obvious. But we're kind of in short supply of folks who will state the obvious. And the obvious statement is there's no emergency other than the one that President Trump, as Tiernan said, is trying like hell to create. With that, we'd love to open it up and take questions, please. Yeah, Josh.
How concerned are you that Trump could actually succeed at using the powers that this order is designed to unlock and fast track fossil fuel projects. We already see the Army Corps sort of establishing a bucket of projects, I think, to qualify and bypass the Clean Water Act. We saw Trump put an order late yesterday to assert control over FERC, which they used in the first Trump administration to try to, subsidize coal and nuclear plants. I mean, what's your level of concern that they can actually succeed?
I mean, it's going to have an impact, and it's going to have an impact on jobs that will be negative. What the scale of that, we don't know yet. It will have an impact on prices. There's no question about that. Prices are going to go up because they're not letting the market do its work. What I will say is we've created a juggernaut. These industries are not going away. When you look at a grid that had 95% of its generation last year come from non-carbon sources, that means the market has spoken. How much damage they can do in the next 4 years, I think that's an open question. But this industry is now doing more deals per day than conventional energy is by roughly a factor of 2. It is not going away, and we're going to do everything we can to fight to make sure we keep those jobs and we keep people's electric rates as low as possible.
One thing I'll add to it is, this is our energy guy, and I'm kind of here because I'm like the Article 1, Article 2 fanatic. And look, this is an opening salvo on day one of the president. I don't think I can get Congress to do this. So let me just declare a fake emergency, and I'll do it myself. And a fake emergency unchallenged will lead to a whole lot of other fake emergencies and a whole lot of other power grabs. So that's one of the reasons we're doing this on this day one order that he entered, because we are worried about him using this even more going forward. Please.
Hi, Kelly Lunny with Bloomberg Government. What are you hearing from your Republican colleagues, at least maybe privately, about this national energy emergency and any of the other energy climate moves that the Trump administration has made, particularly those who represent districts where clean energy is a source of the economy?
The willingness to state the obvious, that's what your question is about. We're seeing green shoots, I guess is the way I would describe it, if I can kind of describe it broadly. Legislators from the Midwest that are talking about what these ag cuts are meaning. Legislators from states with big research universities talking about what NIH funding cuts mean. And yes, legislators who are worried about this sham energy emergency and it hurting wind and solar. Some of the states that have been the best in deploying wind and solar are very red states with Republican senators, and they're not out here advocating for what Donald Trump is doing. There was a good article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, I hate to mention a competitor, but it was an article about conservatives starting to be nervous about these broad assertions of executive power. And they used the sham energy emergency declaration as one of the examples of people like, wow, because remember, there's going to be a Democratic president in the future. And if you start to allow sham emergencies to be declared to justify things that are driven by other nefarious motives, then that becomes a precedent that is a dangerous precedent to open. So we are hearing concerns about it. How will those concerns manifest themselves in this first vote? I mean, I'm a pretty realistic guy. I don't think we're going into this thinking that, barely 6 weeks into the Trump administration, everybody's going to stand and say, you're right, we got to stand up against you. But we're going to make the case that you're cutting jobs. We're going to make the case that you're raising prices. And the way this particular tool works, if we are not successful, you come back 6 months later and renew it. You do it. If you're unsuccessful, you come back 6 months later and renew it. And I'll tell you what, if we're not successful next week, when we come back in 6 months to renew it, we're going to be able to show that prices have gone up. We're going to be able to show that jobs have been cut. We're going to be able to say, I told you so, you should have listened to us, and you should have protected your constituents. Please.
Zach Hill with S&P Global. Just to follow up, Senator Heinrich is the ranking member of Senate ENR, which obviously has jurisdiction over FERC. Just wondering if you have any other further thoughts on the executive order from last night, kind of asserting White House control over the commission. Any concerns?
I mean, FERC is an independent body for a reason. We've seen this movie before, but FERC survived and went on to continue to, I think, do a remarkable job of staying non-political. And I will certainly do everything I can to maintain their independence. And What we don't need is a political ping pong match when it comes to a regulator like FERC. We need people to call balls and strikes.
Please.
Are you guys planning any actions during the Votorama reconciliation process, perhaps push back on some of this energy moves, votes or whatever? Are you planning anything specific on that?
How many amendments have been filed? Probably hundreds and hundreds, right? So how many will get called up? I'm not exactly sure, but it was interesting on the Budget Committee. It was interesting in that in the Budget Committee deliberation last week. The two lead arguments that the R's were making were, we need to do more defense spending. We don't need reconciliation for that. We do that all the time, bipartisan. We need to do more border spending. You don't need reconciliation for that. We've done that bipartisan.
What do you need reconciliation for?
Exactly. Tax cuts for the wealthiest at the expense of programs for everybody else. But it was interesting that they were layering in this third piece. They were layering in an energy argument. Oh, we're in an energy disaster. Everything's horrible. The sky is falling. And it was interesting to watch our Republican colleagues say that. So maybe they'll say that when we're in the debate next week. Maybe they'll use some of their 3 hours of debate to talk about woe is us. But these are the facts. We're the envy of the world when it comes to energy innovation and energy production right now. And we're on an amazing trajectory if this guy doesn't screw it up. So I suspect you will see some of the amendments. There's a huge number filed, gets winnowed down. You'll see some of the amendments going at an issue like this. The main fight on this will be after reconciliation is done, but you'll see us queue up the topic as part of the reconciliation discussion. Other questions, please?
If you could help our friends at Telemundo, would you mind just saying something in Spanish about this direct resolution and forcing a vote on this and why it's so essential?
Es difícil para los demócratas en minoridad a tener oportunidades para votar en nuestras prioridades. Los republicanos tienen la mayoría y las prioridades de ellos son el trabajo de cada día, pero hay algunas maneras a tener votos en nuestros valores y nuestras prioridades. El presidente ha dicho que hay una emergencia de energía en este país y es una mentira, porque ahorita estamos produciendo más energía de cualquier otro tiempo en nuestra historia, en oil y gasolina y petróleo y también en energía renewable, no sé, energía limpia. Entonces vamos a tener ese voto en la semana que viene. Cada senador puede declarar si estamos apoyando un futuro de energía limpia o no. Other questions? All right. Thank you all so much. And there's a vote on. I think we may need to go up and do that. But thank you guys so much.